Slapton was really quite a busy little village. We had 2 shops, a grocery shop and a post office, 2 butchers and a baker, our own policeman and our own nurse. And nobody really went outside the village very much at all.
It was a village that had plenty of shops. Well, we had 4 shops, 2 bakeries, 2 butchers. Well, we had everything really, policeman, nurse, cobblers, tailor. There wasn't really much that we didn't have before the war.
There used to be a carrier, Mr. Mitchamore, that used to go to Kingsbridge a couple of times a week and bring back orders from different people, from tanners, you know, the clothing people in at Kingsbridge, and well, just different shopping and that. But apart from that, nobody ever went out of the village very much.
So totally different than now. I was born in Brook Street, Slapton. And in that street, there was over 30 children. And now, there was none at all. Not one. That's one difference.
Like the chantry, for instance, there was 2 or 3 men working in the gardens there alone. And the farms, you know, there were 4 or 5 men working on the farms, you know, and there was 4 or 5 farms around the area. And it was just really a busy, industrious little village, like. And, you know, as I say, with the bakery, employed 4 or 5 people, and the 2 pubs, and yeah, it was, you know, it was quite a busy little village.
We had no electricity, no water in the houses. We had to all fetch our own water. There was a generator then, Mr. Weeks, who lived at the field centre actually. He put a generator in, and a few people did get electricity through that. But it wasn't until after the war that we had water and electricity put into the houses. So we really had a busy time, you know. All the water had to be fetched from, there was different taps around the village where we could fetch our water. So we kept quite busy, really.
In Brook Street, it's still running now, a pipe from a spring. And it's always been running, even when there's been a drought. And it's still running now, and the people used to get their water mostly from there. But our water, where we lived, it came down from a well, about a couple of $100 away.
When I was still at school, I went to the school up here, at the top of the hill. But when I came home, I always went to my grandparents down at Carr Lane and filled all their water, buckets, whatever they had, for the day. And that was every night when I came home from school. And then there was another old lady that lived at the top of Brook Street. I used to go and do the same for her, fetch her water. But there were taps, you know, everywhere that actually the ones I used were running water. They're still running today.
My job when I came home from school was to fetch the water from down top of Old Hill, and water for the toilets across the road, and then nip up the shop for Mother or Reenie Skinner or anybody. And not like nowadays, will you go? You never got the option. You went.
Street was, in those days, was just a small village. I mean, there were quite a lot of us children here. I mean, we all used to play together. We had the school here. At break times at school, at play times, we'd have paper chases, and we'd go right down as far as Gold Valley and back again in less than half an hour sort of thing. I mean, we used to have fun in those days. In the evenings, when it was light evenings, you'd go out and play and walk around. You were never indoors. If a car drove through the village, you stood still and looked at it, almost wondering what it was. You didn't get many cars going through. You get the odd lorry and things going through, and the old buses, but there wasn't a lot of cars.
Most of the time, we spent out of doors. You know, scrolling out across the fields, or you had seasons for, like, Tricotin, you had seasons for hockey, not proper hockey. What we used to do, go around the edges and find a stick with a big knob on the end and cut that out for a hockey stick. And we didn't have proper football. We used to play football with a tennis ball up in the playground, you know, school playground. And then chestnut time, we'd go out chestnutting. In the summer, we would go in the cornfields catching rabbits, you know. And in them days, you could wander anywhere you wanted to. You know, nowadays, farmers look at it if you're walking on their fields, but then you just scrolled wherever you wanted, you know. And that's mostly what we've done as kids.
I went to school, I think I was not quite 5 years old. And at the time, the headmistress was living next door with my grandparents. And I went to school for a couple of days, and after that I decided I didn't want any more. And I can still remember her picking me up under her arm, and I think I was probably as stiff as a board, and I remember her saying, "Jean Yalland, you will go to school." And she carried me from where we lived nearly into the school itself. And after that I remember thinking, well, I suppose I've got to do this, so just get on with it. I can remember that very, very clearly. And I remember on a Friday night, one of the village shops opened until 8 o'clock. And my grandfather, I was allowed to stay up late on a Friday and allowed to go to the village shop. And usually I could choose 2 halfpennies worth of sweets in a paper cone-shaped little bag.
Born in Torcross and brought up in Torcross, virtually lived here ever since. And when you stop and think, I had an idyllic childhood. I mean, we used to have the beach, we had a boat, we used to have the cliffs, we'd climb in and play in, and on the lee when the keeper wasn't looking. And, you know, just idyllic childhood. It was very busy in the summer. I mean, we had a Torcross Hotel, which used to be, you know, buzzing all summer, and the Grey Homes, which was hotels. Plus the fact that most of the houses then were lived in full time, not like now where they're just summer lets and that sort of thing. Families were in the village. In the hotel, we had the head waiter, had a couple of children, and the handyman, the boots, old Bill Turner, he had 3 children. There was a lot of children in the village.
I mean, as children, we used to go to the chapel in Slapton, and then once a year we used to go to painting, and we went to painting nearly we did all the time. I can't ever remember going anywhere else but painting. And then we used to go and have a tea in Dellers, and I'm not sure whether it was Dellers or Evans's, one of them, you know, all the people that went to the chapel were parents and all. We went to and had our tea, and then came back again, and you know, sort of, I can remember having ice cream and that, which we never really saw, except when you went to somewhere like that.
We were always in groups, you know, 4 or 5 of us, or 6, just to be in, and we used to get at Widle, just at the back. There was 2 families there, and they always used to come down, and lads from Stokenham would get on their bikes and come here because the sea was an attraction. There was always quite a few children around, yeah.
Children would come and play. Usually at a weekend we had 2 or 3 other children who came to play. And in one of the little outhouses where we lived, I had 2 imaginary friends, Tom, Dick and Fudger Wodger. And they were my They were my playmates, my friend. Until Margaret, my sister, was born, I was then 6. And it was different then. I had a different sort of playmate. I can remember that very, very clearly. Very clearly indeed.
To go down to Plymouth, I mean, take you all day. Well, take you half the day to get down there nearly, because I think the buses used to take about, they used to take about 2.5 hours, something like that, to get to Plymouth. So, I mean, times you got down there, it's almost time to start coming back again. Another 2.5 hours back, that's 5 hours of the day out, isn't it? The main place that we used to go do most of the shopping was Dartmouth. Because in those days at Dartmouth you could get practically anything. I mean, let's face it, people didn't have the money to travel very far in those days. Dartmouth was as good as anywhere then. Yeah.
I remember going to Plymouth once on the bus because my grandparents had people in, I think it was Lipson, and we used to go and visit them. But apart from that, to Dartmouth occasionally, perhaps to see the doctor or to see a dentist. And a trip to Paynton or Torquay was very rare, but it took nearly all day to get there and not do a lot there and come back. But I do remember once when I was very small on the bus going to visit Paynton Zoo. And I was probably about 7 or 8 then, by that time.
At a very young age, my brother Arthur and myself and Mike, my other brother, we used to go catching rabbits a lot. And I used to go on my own and come home from school and get some nets. And we had a dog called Rover. And I used to go down around the marshes and catch rabbits. And you were never afraid to go anywhere.
So you were always out in the air, you know, scrawling about somewhere, doing something or other, even if it was illegal. Which the one biggest crime was scrubbing apples, and we had our old policeman was called Windsor, and at night we still go walking. At night we used to go for walks and that, and suddenly he'd pop out of a doorway. Can you swear? No. What are you young beggars up to then? And nothing. He said, "You have been scrubbing apples again?" I went, No. So then you was allowed to go on your way. But he would have never run you in. He might have given you a clout on the ear all, but that would be the end of it.
There was also a big boathouse on this side of the beach, and the fishing crew used to use that for their boat. I can't remember it, but there used to be 2 fishing crews here in the village. But I can only remember one. And they used to mostly, with a seine net for mackerel, you used to catch thousands. Sometimes they weren't allowed to do this, but also you get salmon in the net. So what you used to do is dig a little hole in the sand, put the salmon in there, and someone would chuck their coat on the top so that they know where it was. Because this chap used to come in, used to call him the Salmon King. And he was out to catch, catching salmon, which you weren't allowed to.
At the time, it was our way of life, and we knew nothing was different. It was always the same.
No one earned a lot of money, but they all lived well. They always had plenty to eat, always kept clean, tidy. It was good.
By the time war was declared, things started to change.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
I remember the day Neville Chamberlain said we were at war. I remember sitting on a wide arm of an armchair with my grandfather. And I remember hearing war, but really it had little significance to a 7-year-old. Until then, I think history came into it. And I remember thinking, well, there have been wars before now, but it's never really affected us. Parents, grandparents, yes, but not the children.
The serious never entered our heads as kids, oh no. But we knew that, when war was declared, that was it.
And then I remember seeing men in uniform, soldiers for the first time ever, British soldiers. And in the village there were soldiers billeted and men, RAF men billeted, and some of them had their families here, and the children went to the village school. And it's something different, people who'd come from the town with a different way of life, but most of them seemed to integrate fairly well and fairly quickly.
We knew there was a war on, but to start off with, it wasn't too bad. But then once they started bombing Plymouth, then we knew there was something on, because very often the planes would come, the planes that bombed Plymouth would come back via this way. And I mean, if they had any bombs left on, they just used to drop them anywhere on the way back. I mean, we were lucky here, we didn't get any, but several places did have bombs dropped on them.
The first thing I knew about it, I remember Mother saying to us that we had to be careful, curtains had to be put up, and as soon as it got dark and you didn't leave the door open, as soon as you went out you closed it, and so that there wasn't any